This episode includes discussion of miscarriage, suicidal ideation, self-harm, and postpartum psychosis. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Relationscapes, the podcast where we explore the world's most pressing issues while also learning more about ourselves. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode about postpartum psychosis is author Ayana Lage.
I was very aware of the risks of postpartum mental health. You know, I'd heard of postpartum psychosis. It didn't even cross my mind as something that could happen to me, but I'd heard of it. But I think I kind of had this thought of, I've already been through so much when it comes to pregnancy and fertility and all of this. Like, I deserve to have a good experience, so that's what's going to happen.
Following a devastating miscarriage, Ayana Lage was overjoyed to deliver a baby a little more than a year later. She was determined to have the best possible birthing experience, and so it made sense to her when the literal voice of God started talking, told her that she'd been chosen as a prophet, a blessed mother who would share God's revelations with the world. What could possibly be better than that? In reality, Ayana was experiencing postpartum psychosis, a potentially life-threatening psychiatric emergency that affects roughly 1 or 2 people in every 1,000 who give birth. The stakes of understanding postpartum psychosis are high. Right now, a woman named Lindsay Clancy is on trial for killing her 3 young children in a case that centers partly on whether postpartum psychosis played a role. And for many people, this case may be their first encounter with the disorder, and that's a dangerous way to learn about it. We need to listen to medical experts, and we also need to hear firsthand accounts from parents themselves. Ayana can tell us what postpartum psychosis felt like to her from the inside and what she wishes more people understood about it. She's the author of the book Missing Me, a memoir of postpartum psychosis and the long road back, and she joins us to talk about it right now. Ayana, welcome to Relationscapes.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
I want to take a little risk to begin here. Toward the end of the book, you're writing about the problem of self-disclosure, something that you wrestle with. And after you had spent time hospitalized for severe postpartum psychosis, you had to think through when you're going to talk publicly about it and like how much you were going to say. And you had a big enough online following that being gone for a few weeks was noticeable. So you had to kind of consider what that looked like. And you were kind of vague about it at first and then decided to just be more open, and then there's a Cosmopolitan article, and you're being interviewed on news shows and podcasts, and as all this is rolling out, it sort of starts to exhaust you. So I wanted you to read from page 158 here about what you were going through in talking about such a traumatic and personal and stigmatized experience.
Yeah, for sure. I always say that I'm not the child who is, excited to read out loud in class. So I can write, but reading...
Really?
Reading is here or there. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm just giving the disclaimer in case I'm stuttering or sound awkward.
Oh, and the good thing about a podcast is like you can always reset yourself and I'll just like scrub it out. So like nobody will even know.
All right. I cry through interviews, speak solemnly on podcasts, and pour my heart into articles and blog posts. This is what coping looks like. If I cannot undo the psychosis, I think I will help other people who are suffering. The goal is admirable, but I often fall short. It all exhausts me, a truth I try my hardest to ignore. Answering the same questions repeatedly, trying to explain how my life fell apart without talking too much. The struggle is worth it if I can help even one person, or maybe not. People ask the same questions, wondering how it all began and what it's like to experience delusions. Occasionally, they scramble for something to say and struggle to find the words. Awkward silence becomes the norm. When they catch their verbal footing, they look at me with admiration. I couldn't have gotten through it, they say. This is meant as a compliment. Making it to the other side means I'm determined and have proven something to myself. But I find myself resenting the sentiment. What were my options?
Yeah, you're resenting the sentiment. If there's something more tedious than talking about it, I wonder how talking about it is, because that's what I'm trying to do.
It's all very meta. No, I mean, I think that I've reached a point now where especially after releasing the book, where I'm a lot more comfortable with it. But in the beginning, I had a lot of conflicted emotions about all of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you still get tired of explaining or talking about any particular part of it that's just like, oh, that part, okay?
I think, no, this is maybe a bad thing. I don't know. Depends. I don't know what my therapist would say about this, but I feel like I've kind of like distilled it into a and then this happened, and then that happened, and then I was in the hospital, and then I, was combative, and then I was released, and then, so I feel like I've told the story probably publicly about like 20 plus times now. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to say that I've like compartmentalized, but it's easier to tell it now than it once
Hmm.
was, for better or for worse.
You've just practiced it. I mean, that's just
Yes.
repetition, right? Is there anything that still energizes you about the conversation where you kind of get into a flow about it, or that you feel more excited about?
I think that how do I want to put this? I think the religious aspect of it, how it
Hmm.
affected my faith, my already complicated relationship with faith, is still very interesting to me because it's something that I'm still experiencing. So that is something that when it comes up, how hearing from God and talking to God changed how I viewed God.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's still, again, I'm still figuring it out 6 years later. So it's all very interesting to me.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that too and talk a little bit about faith deconstruction and how God played into your
Yes.
postpartum psychosis is a really, really important part of the book.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of books on childhood trauma, and most of them include stories about how parents were dysfunctional or even abusive. And your own traumatic childhood experiences didn't seem to really be about that, though. This, I think, in some ways set your book apart from a lot of these books that I've read, in that you didn't really have like abusive parents.
Yeah, no, my parents were wonderful. I still talk to my parents multiple times a day. I mean, it's a running joke with my husband that if he can't reach me, I'm probably on the phone with my mom.
She's with us
So,
right now, actually. Let's bring her on. Let's
can you
go. No.
imagine? Can you imagine? But it's not out of, it's not totally far-fetched that she would be. Yeah, no, I love my parents. They have been fantastic my entire life. They've done a really good job.
Hmm.
So I think that I got really lucky in that the things that I experienced, my pain wasn't exacerbated by them.
Mhm.
And they helped me a lot once they knew some of what I was dealing with.
And what you were dealing with pretty early on, you started struggling. You remember your first panic attack happening at 11 years old. Take
Yes.
us there. What did 11-year-old Ayana experience as a panic attack? I'm sure it must have been completely, I mean, this is a totally new experience. It must have been really scary.
Yeah, I think that I genuinely briefly thought that I'd like lost touch with reality.
Mm,
I was 11, so I don't think that my mind really put all of that together in that way, but I just felt
sure.
like something was very wrong. But it also felt almost shameful. Like I didn't know why, but something that I shouldn't be talking about because, if I told someone, they might look at me and think like, okay, like, something is really wrong with her. I think that I was afraid that that would be people's perception of me,
Yeah.
that something was wrong with me. So I just pushed it out and I don't know.
The shame of it's really interesting because it's like, I'm sure you didn't have too many experiences growing up where like mental health was stigmatized to a child. Like I'm sure your parents weren't going around saying, if you have a dissociative episode, that makes you really messed up. Like, but there's something about the experience of it that's scary and that you want to keep secret. And where does that come from? I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I don't even think that I had the framework to view what was happening as like a mental health problem or episode.
Hmm.
I think I tried to push it out of my mind because it was so scary.
Yeah. Describe it. Like you sort of felt trapped in another body or something. Talk about like what the actual experience of it was like.
Yeah, I think that it's so hard for me to explain even now because it sounds so, I don't know, it's like impossible for me to make it sound as big and overwhelming and like
Hmm.
all consuming as it was. But, I'd have these moments where I would just basically just feel like everything around me was unfamiliar. I didn't recognize. I look down at my hands, I didn't recognize them. I didn't recognize the walls of my room. I didn't recognize my loved ones. So which I later learned, obviously, there was a dissociative episode of panic that I was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But in the moment, of course, I thought, like, am I real? So there's like derealization as well. So it was a whole thing that thankfully I eventually was able to overcome, but it took a lot.
And you talk about a friend that you made. You're 12 years old. A new friend named Crystal moves in, and she starts to talk to you. You guys are having like, really personal conversations with each other, and she starts talking about self-harm, which I don't know if that was the first time you kind of confronted the idea of self-harm, but if you'd thought about it before, this is when you started to kind of try it out.
Yeah, I think I was vaguely familiar. I mean, like many children my age or people who grew up around my time, I had access to the internet probably a little bit too early.
Yeah, what's your time?
So I'm 33. So
Okay,
I
yeah,
feel
okay.
like, so, when I was like, early to mid 2000s, my parents didn't really know all that the internet could be. So I was able to pretty much have free reign at, 10
Yeah.
years old, which is not what my children will experience. But yeah, so I think that I maybe vaguely knew that this was something that happened just from like live journal and Zanga and all of that. But
Hmm.
I hadn't considered it as something that could be useful to me until I met a friend who told me about it.
Hmm. And what seemed useful about it?
I think that, as I mentioned, when I'm having these moments where I'm like, am I even real? Like I have like no concept anymore of reality or, what is actually happening, that it almost felt like this could be a release. It could be grounding. It could be a
Hmm.
tangible reminder that like, yes, I am. And this sounds, I know, very probably twisted, but in my mind, I was like, this could be something that would help me at least feel real. So yeah.
Well, I mean, it may sound twisted, but the reality is that people do engage with it because it performs a function for them. Like, I think if it didn't do something for people, they wouldn't do it. So that makes sense that you're describing it as sort of centering and coming back into yourself through self harm. But there was more as well. You even started thinking about suicide a few months later. So talk about that experience because you're still so young. And I think, I'm not sure how many people are aware that this isn't super common for children, but it's also not extremely rare either. So, talk about your experience with suicidal ideation, and your parents had no idea that this was going on.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was unfortunately just a natural progression once I was already harming myself to kind of just start wondering. I mean, it started like very lightly, like what would my life look like or what would the world look like if I wasn't here? What,
Hmm.
how would like is my life worth living? So like these very like abstract, not really specific thoughts, but then like as anyone who's dealt with suicidal ideation or, considered suicide can tell you, it can get very dangerous very quickly.
Hmm.
So, yeah, my thoughts kind of spiraled pretty quickly. And again, I think that I was also still dealing with this like panic that I couldn't place. And then I had all of these, I talk about later in the book, issues with self-image and all of these things, like everything kind of just swirling together.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, thankfully I got some help, not all of the help that I needed, but I did get enough help to not be in that middle space
Yeah,
anymore.
let's talk about the help that you did get, because the way you describe it in the book is that it was helpful, but it wasn't perhaps everything that it could be. You talked to a school counselor who alerted your parents, so now they're aware of what's going on. Must have been terrifying for them. First of all, were you scared that they found out, or how did that go?
I think that at that point, I was not even thinking about the consequences.
Hmm.
I was secretly relieved, I think. I
Hmm.
think that I realized that I mean, again, I'm 12 years old, so who even knows what I'm actually thinking? But in retrospect, I feel like I
Yeah.
knew that I didn't actually want to do this. So it kind of felt
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm at an age still where like my parents are like the safe people. They know what to do. So they knew, so I knew that
Right.
they would know what to do. So, I mean, I did feel a little
Okay.
bit of relief, yeah.
Right. And you didn't feel scared of your parents. You didn't have that
No.
sort of, could have been a totally different circumstance than it is for
Sure.
some kids if they have
Yeah.
a broken relationship with their parents or if their parents don't even care.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways parents can react to that. But they want to connect you with therapy.
Yeah.
And you come from a Christian background. So talk
Yes.
about that background and the therapist that you ended up meeting with.
So, when I first started therapy at 12, 13 years old, it was not faith-based
Hmm.
counseling. I think it was just someone who specialized in adolescent treatment. But when I restarted therapy a few years later, it was important to me to have a Christian counselor, to have someone who understood how faith played in.
Okay.
I felt very strongly that faith played a role in all of this somehow, and I felt like I needed someone who understood that as well.
Hmm. What do you think the role that faith was playing in the struggles that you were having?
I grew up Pentecostal, so I did hear a lot of times in church that, Satan, the devil, all of that was
Hmm.
behind these, spiritual attacks, these mental problems people were having. So I mean, obviously that was kind of ingrained in me, but I also think
Hmm.
that I just thought like, okay, God really cares about me and wants me to be better, and I want to keep that in mind as I like process this and seek treatment. So I think that I thought that faith-based counseling was the best solution.
Okay. Tell me if this sounds familiar. I know a little bit about Pentecostalism. One of the things that Pentecostals will sometimes point to is like in the Bible, in the New Testament, Paul talks about principalities and powers that exist in the world that are all around us. And a lot of them can be negative. They're sort of like evil influences, demonic spirits, and things like
Yeah.
this that are a real part of the world. And Christians that are raised with that kind of background experience that as a reality, that there's demons around, that they can mess with you, and they could put thoughts in your head, or they can make you feel certain ways about yourself, etc. Is that kind of the thing that you were dealing with? Was
Yeah,
it that specific?
to an extent, yes. I mean, I think that like I fully believe people could be possessed by demons.
Okay.
Which now in my current where I'm at in life is not not where I'm
Yeah.
at. So it's kind of even
Yeah.
weird to say. But yeah, I mean, I think that we just like people believe in God and people can conceive, okay, they believe in God. We believe in the devil just as much as we
Mm-hmm.
believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
Both were real, very real. So
Yeah. I grew up within Mormonism, and I remember sort of growing up with the idea of a literal Satan person who was like there to tempt you or make you do bad stuff or whatever, and then also evil spirits that were around to do kind of the same thing. And I, made a transition away from believing in like a literal person who was Satan or
yeah.
like literal demons or something. But I think I can kind of relate there to a younger me, like a child who would think about those kind of powers, and it's pretty scary. It's
Yeah.
actually a scary thing to deal with. Like they could be around you. Like I would sometimes get scared at night going to sleep because I'm like, is there like some kind of devil in here, you know?
Right. Yes. Yeah. No,
Okay,
it's
so that resonates. Okay, so getting with a Christian therapist, they're going to have that worldview as well, but also have some therapeutic tools based on research, not just based on scripture. What was that therapy experience like for you?
I feel like when I write about it in the book, I almost, in retrospect, feel like I reduced it, um, not unfairly, but maybe I didn't paint the clearest picture because it was
Hmm.
very helpful for me in some
Hmm.
ways when we talked about like the body image stuff and just
Mm-hmm.
some of my anxiety, situational anxiety, and there were things that she was extremely helpful with. But there was never a mention of psychiatry or medication, never a
Right.
mention of seeking additional help when I was describing these very intense panic episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's the impression I got from the book.
yeah.
I mean, it seemed like you saw this person using the tools that they had, but also having like a set limitation, perhaps over talking about medication or something, which was probably somewhat ideological. I would imagine that some Christian therapists shy away from that, but also there's like more naturalistic or holistic type of therapists who don't want to go the route of medication. And there's a lot of stigma around medication, and there's conversations around whether people are over medicated or not. But I think your experience and my own really show that medication can make a big difference for
Yes.
people and can be part of a really a necessary part of an overall plan to address mental health issues. And I think having a therapist that way for you, that avenue was just cut off, and that wasn't great.
Yeah.
But also, you did get some stuff out of it.
I did. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We're talking with Ayana Lage. We're talking about the book Missing Me, a memoir of postpartum psychosis and the long road back. All right, Ayana. So, as a 19-year-old college student, you're still having different struggles. A boyfriend of yours at the time suggests therapy. So, you're still kind of having these ups and downs, these backs and forths. And as a 20-year-old college student, you got this really big internship opportunity. And it was a big deal for you. It's kind of the next logical step in the advancement of your future career, right? And you visit home in between school semesters, and instead of going home and like celebrating and everybody's happy with you for getting this opportunity, you have a big breakdown here. So take us to this breakdown and describe it for us.
I think that I'd been running away from my thoughts for a really long time. I mean, dating back to being 11 years old, but
Mm.
I had almost like a cloud looming under me, and maybe I like, maybe it's raining and I have an umbrella that's like about to buckle under the weight of the rain. I don't know a way to describe it, but I think that I was just naturally reached a breaking point because I was still feeling all of this panic and I had no solution. And I think a part of me felt
Mm.
like I'm in therapy and it's helpful. Sure. And I really like my therapist, but this hasn't fixed me. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. So busied myself with school and extracurriculars and, family and all of this. So I had no time at all to process or think. I mean, I was leaving early in the morning, getting home late at night, basically just showering and sleeping at home. Like
Hmm.
everything, every moment of my day was consumed by something. I was very, very
Hmm.
busy. So
So from the outside, you
when,
probably looked like a big overachiever, someone who
right.
really had their shit together.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
But when I got home and that all kind of fell away, I just crashed. And I
Mm.
think it was going to happen eventually. I think that just being home and not having all of these things going on is what triggered it, but it would have happened
Mm.
one way or another, I think.
Yeah, like all the scaffolding fell away, and you were
Yes.
just
Yeah.
there. What exactly happened, like with the breakdown?
I just started, I mean, it started with like a lot of crying and like
Mm.
sadness and all of that, but I felt like I couldn't get out of bed within a couple of days of feeling weird. And I was struggling to eat. I was struggling to do anything. I was struggling to get dressed. Um, and it all happened pretty quickly. I
Mm.
mean, I can't think of the timeline right now without a calendar in front of me, but I want to say it was maybe a week between me getting home from maybe a week and a half between me getting home from school to being hospitalized. So
Mm.
it happened pretty quickly.
And how'd the hospitalization happen? Was that your call, or did your parents encourage you?
Yeah, we tried to visit a couple of like outpatient therapy practices, and one of the ones we drove to and waited to be seen, they were like, we can't really, we're super packed right now. We can give you tools that you can use at home, but we can't see you. Like they did a consultation, they were like, we can't actually see you today.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I think that my parents are like, okay. At that point, I'd said the words, I am suicidal. So they were
Mm-hmm.
treating it as an emergency. And I think that when it was not being treated as an emergency at these outpatient facilities, it was like, okay, the only place to go is the emergency room. So that's how that happened. I wasn't opposed. I was scared, but I don't think I was opposed to it. I think that I was just really desperate for help.
Mm-hmm. And you describe going through the intake questions, and your later self will come back to this moment and sort of, I don't know, maybe even see a little bit of ableism, I guess, in the way that you like first encountered these questions, but you started getting these questions about hearing voices and whether you believed there were secret messages on TV. Talk about some of those questions and your initial reaction to those.
When I was admitted to the hospital, I mean, as anyone who's ever had a psych stay or psych hold can tell you, they do go through like a detailed questionnaire to kind of figure out where you're at. And some of the questions, as you mentioned, included things that I thought sounded ludicrous, like hearing voices,
Mm-hmm.
having the TV talk to you, having the radio send you secret messages. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
thinking, like, do I want to be here if
Mm.
there are people who say yes to those questions
Yeah,
in this hospital? I don't want to be. I was again. I'm
right.
20 years old, so like I am old enough to know some things, but young enough that like this is a completely foreign, scary experience. And I think that for whatever reason, that just made it even scarier for me. The idea of like I'm going to be here with people who are seriously ill, which I didn't view
Mm-hmm.
myself as at the time. So, yeah.
Right. And this first hospitalization you kind of describe as overall a positive thing. It sounds like it helped you get stabilized, get some footing. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, you would have another hospitalization coming up that was not like that, that was quite the opposite. Walk us through that hospitalization, the second hospitalization, how it was different from the first one.
So about 4 years after that, at this point, I've been married for about 2 years, and I'm living, in a different city than my hometown with my husband. And I'd been laid off from a job. We had, like, some interpersonal drama with his workplace that was he worked at a church, and so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't really a normal workplace. It kind of consumed his whole life. So if he had work drama, it became our life drama as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there was just a lot going on. I don't think that I was on the proper combination of medicine,
Hmm.
but I reached a moment where I called the suicide hotline because I just felt like I don't really know what to do. I'm feeling very overwhelmed. And then decided to go to the hospital, assuming that maybe foolishly now that they would have counselors there who would be able to help me or a psychiatrist who'd be able to talk to me and then, we'd go from there. But instead, I was involuntarily admitted because I mentioned suicidal ideation. I
Mm-hmm.
found the hospital stay mostly pointless, which I stand by. I mean, it was a unit that was so crowded. I saw the doctor for maybe a couple minutes every day. I just was waiting out the 72 hours that I had to be there, that they were holding me there for legally. So I left that hospital stay feeling like, yeah, I don't really want to do that ever again, even
Mm-hmm.
if it requires me not being open with someone about my mental health. Like, I'm not going to do that again because
Mm-hmm.
it was just so terrible.
Yeah, it seemed like one of the biggest things was that you just felt that the whole thing was against your will. Like the first time that you went wasn't great, but you had an experience that wasn't so uncomfortable. You went there and it felt more like your choice.
Yes.
Then this one felt more like an imprisonment, it sounded like.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
And you say that it kind of made you lose your faith in the system at that point. Like you didn't want to get involved again if like you said, you maybe you'd rather lie than wind up in a place like that again.
Yeah, I think that I didn't have an idea. I mean, I guess I probably knew on an intellectual level, but I never thought that you could go to a hospital and not leave. Again, like you could want to leave and not be able to leave. I hadn't encountered that before. So
Right.
I think that, I think that having like psych programs and having involuntarily holds, like, there's obviously value in that. For me, though, it was applied in a way that just ended up feeling a little bit traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely had less faith in the medical system than I started with.
Mm-hmm. In between those two hospitalizations, the kind of more positive experience one and the really negative experience one, you decided to talk publicly about your mental health struggles and about being hospitalized the first time. And you talk about how depression didn't rob you of feeling good about yourself. It just stopped you from feeling anything at all. So you're really, maybe for the first time publicly to a lot of people, talking about your experience. And you say in the book, I don't know it, but this is one of the most pivotal moments of my life. Why was talking about it publicly like that so pivotal?
I think it was just such a radical shift going from not wanting even my therapist to know the details of what I was feeling to the entire world knowing, and opening myself up to people's criticism and to people reaching out in positive ways, but sometimes overwhelming ways. And so, I mean, and I also think that at that point, had an idea of, I'm in college, I am trying to build a career for myself as a journalist, but if someone Googles me and I start to write about this and talk about this, like, they might find out that I deal with depression and anxiety, and that could affect their perception of me. And that was my thought process. And I mean, this was now 12 years ago, I want to say, 13 years ago that this was all happening. Can't do math on the fly, but it was a long time ago. I've been out of college for 11 years and it was like, in the middle of my college experience.
Mm.
So I think felt like people were talking about it a lot less then than they are now. So there was just a lot going on in my head.
In retrospect, you're reflecting on how you felt at the time. This part really stood out to me. You're saying, most important to me, I never lost touch with reality. And you talk about kind of being relieved that your experience of your mental health difficulty this time were somewhat more palatable. That like, oh, I'm not crazy, I just have this. So you're still kind of distinguishing between kind of a more palatable version of mental health struggles versus like being crazy.
Yeah. I think that I felt grateful that I was so high achieving because of my, coping mechanisms. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of silly, but as I mentioned, before I was hospitalized, I was going, 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 but I became successful because of that. I did very well because I put all of my energy and time toward work and school instead of thinking about my feelings. So I think that I kind of felt like the anxiety, especially, like, empowered me to be more successful than I would have been without it, and also
Hmm.
made me more self-aware. So those were things that were very important to me. And I think that I don't know that I would ever have actually said, like, "Oh, I'm not crazy, that person is," but I think that there was an undercurrent in my mind of, "Okay, like, I'm not actually mentally ill, like, this is just I deal with this, but I'm not actually someone who has, like, mental illness."
Mm-hmm.
So it was a distinction that was important to me, but obviously, like, I was humbled very quickly a few years later.
Yeah, as we'll get to, I feel like maybe the issue, the crux of that is maybe feeling in control.
Yes.
That yeah, that if things had escalated more, if you had experienced a deeper version of these difficulties, that you wouldn't be able to control it at all. You wouldn't be you, and maybe even you wouldn't be you in some sense anymore at all. Like maybe you couldn't trust your own sense of reality or something beyond that.
For sure. I think that I still felt very secure in who I was, especially once I was medicated and seeing a psychologist. Even though I was dealing with these things, I felt very in control. I felt
Hmm.
very self-confident. I felt like, okay, like I know who I am and what I'm doing. So those were things that were really important to me.
Mm. So, leading up to your first pregnancy, had you thought much about postpartum depression? Had you heard about it? Had you like learned about it in school or anything like that? Like, what was your familiarity with postpartum depression at that point?
So I knew on like a very high level that I was at a higher risk because I had a mental health history.
Hmm.
So I wasn't super terrified of it. I wasn't spending a lot of time worrying about it, but I was aware, okay, this is
Okay.
something that could happen. Yeah.
Was that a thought that you'd sort of like push away really quick, or you just felt like, yeah, that could happen, but I'm not worried about it because it's not likely?
Yeah, I think that I more the latter, and I read
Okay.
about it. I knew some of the warning signs. So I
Yeah.
still felt like, okay, this probably won't happen, but if it does, like we'll be able to figure it out.
Okay, yeah. And, the book is helpful because it lays out some of the risk factors for postpartum psychosis. And like you said, you were somewhat aware of those. You talk about like a history of mental health issues. Bipolar disorder is a risk factor, sleep deprivation, hormonal changes, and also previous experience with traumatic birth or loss. And you had experienced that 16 months before you gave birth to your child. Talk about that as a component of the later postpartum psychosis.
I think so. I did have a miscarriage near the end of my first trimester due to a chromosomal abnormality.
Hmm.
And so I think that going into my second pregnancy, which is the one that ended in postpartum psychosis, I think that I don't know, I had a lot of thoughts about what was and wasn't fair, and I think that I kind of had this idea of nothing going wrong in my pregnancy because I'd already experienced something that was so horrible to me.
Hmm.
So I was very aware of the risks of postpartum mental health, especially postpartum depression, but, I'd heard of postpartum psychosis. It didn't even register. It didn't even cross my mind as something that
Hmm.
could happen to me, but I'd heard of it. But I think I kind of had this thought of, I've already been through so much when it comes to pregnancy and fertility and all of this. Like, I deserve to have a good experience. So that's what's going to happen, kind of like a manifestation
You
thing.
paid your dues.
Yes. So I was kind of manifesting.
It's like cosmic bargaining, or yeah, manifesting.
Yeah.
It's so funny to use that word because I feel like your book describes, instead of the power of positive thinking, it describes the power of negative thinking. This is like this coping mechanism that you picked up where you'd think through the worst case scenarios because then it would become super unlikelies, right?
Yes.
So you'd be
Yes.
like,
Yes.
oh, my
Yes.
mom's totally going to die in a car crash on the way home. And then you're like, then it won't happen because like the odds of you thinking of it would
Yes.
like cancel it out or something.
Yes. Yes. It is. It was and sometimes is still a problem.
Really? You still kind of experience that sometimes?
Yeah, I think that I have a lot of anxiety about bad things happening. And I think that because I've had bad things happen to me that weren't likely to happen,
Huh.
I feel even more so like, I don't know, like the odds are low, but they're still there. So it's still a constant process.
Have you ever read The Secret by chance?
I haven't. I've heard of it
So
obviously, but I haven't read it.
yeah, I mean, it was huge. Like Oprah did it. It's this whole idea of like manifesting.
Mhm.
Also, a lot of Christian communities will kind of have a Christian version of this. And it really is that you like, if you only sow positive thoughts, you'll only harvest positive outcomes. And it's kind of a really problematic. It's sort
Yeah.
of a way of blaming people for their suffering, and it kind of sets the universe up as this magical where you can just do a magical formula and get the outcome you
Yeah.
wanted. Where, yeah, if you just think positive, the only positive will happen. You're the first book I've ever encountered where someone said like the opposite of that, of like, if you think the negative, then you'll kind of ward that off. But it reminded me that I've kind of done that a few times in my life. I remember my mom going on a trip when I was a little kid, and I was sure that the plane would go down, and I ruminated on it and thought about it a lot. And I had that thought of like, well, if I'm thinking about it like this, it's probably not going to happen then.
Yeah. I mean, it just obviously statistically dubious to think this way, but it does feel like,
Yeah.
what are the odds that this thing
Yeah.
that I've come up with is going to happen?
Yes.
But,
And that first pregnancy, that was a big loss for you. You were
Yeah.
excited to be a parent. You lost a child. You experienced it as a lost child, not as like a pregnancy anomaly. And that becomes a heightened risk factor as well. in addition to just being terrible in and of itself, becomes a heightened risk factor for postpartum psychosis. So the second pregnancy, I don't know, it seemed scarier to me because like now you're dealing with the anxiety of possibly losing another pregnancy, in addition to the fact that you're Black and pregnant in America. And I want you to kind of touch on that component of it because Black maternal mortality rates are a really serious concern. And so you had that on your mind as well.
Yeah, it was kind of like the timing wasn't great because this was also near the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So
Hmm.
I was unable to take my husband or anyone with me to doctor's appointments. I wasn't able to have anyone other than my husband in the delivery room. And I'd hired a doula, but then wasn't able, to have her there.
Hmm.
So I think that it was just like there was a lot going on. I was aware that as a Black woman that I was at a higher risk of dying during childbirth or postpartum.
3 times more likely, that the
Yeah.
stats, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
bonkers.
Yeah, it's wild. But I had a lot of anxiety. I don't think that I had as much anxiety about what was going to happen to me postpartum. I think that
Hmm.
after the miscarriage, I was so convinced that something would go wrong with the baby that I
Hmm.
was so like hyper focused on that. But I was also in my spare time not worrying about that, worrying about the element of like Black maternal health. I don't think that I spent as much time on my postpartum mental health because there was just
Hmm.
so much else going on. But that was also a thought that was in my mind.
And that's a big piece too, because sometimes maternal mortality isn't just like up until the baby's delivered. They can count complications that happen after delivery and mental health episodes that happen after delivery, including suicidal ideation. And so for you, your description of the beginnings of postpartum psychosis, I don't want to sound insensitive, but like the way you describe it was sort of like kind of funny. Like your initial symptoms of it were manic and very excited. Like you started texting everybody and like updating everybody about the baby. Like you loved your baby and you wanted everybody to know.
Yes,
And
yes.
some of the moments in there were, is that a gross reaction to kind of be like, oh, like it was kind of see an excited mom, and I'm just like, that is kind of funny to text random people out of the blue that you hadn't talked to in like years and be like, updating about my baby.
It's taken me a long time to view it as funny and not horrendously embarrassing. But I do think that the complicated part of it was that I was being egged on, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
I was posting so much on social media and I was getting so many texts like, basically you're doing a great job, you're such a good
Yeah.
mom, but then also like, wow, you're being really funny. Cause I was cracking jokes left and right.
Yeah.
Kind of the life of the party. It was just like very true of mania. But even in person, I remember I was like telling stories in a way that like my family and my friends were laughing at. Like not, as I'm texting my close friends, I'm just talking about things that have happened and framing them in a way that is like very, very just like very funny. So I think that people just kind of thought that I was just kind of an extreme version of myself and maybe sleep deprivation or giving birth had made me that way. I
Huh.
don't think that anyone was worried when they were receiving the text messages because also like if you're a new mom who's just had an emergency C-section and given birth a month early, like yeah, you might act a little weird. Like
Yeah.
things might not be what you expect. So I think that people gave
Yeah.
me a lot of grace because of that, which is a good thing, but also led to it not being caught until a little bit later on.
Right. Right. And you said it took a little while. So are there things about it now, at least in the early phase, where that you do sort of see some humor in it? Because it sounded like you were saying like, ooh, there was more shame associated with it at first. Like one of the big things that comes to mind is like texting people that it would just be really weird to get a text from somebody you haven't heard from in a long time, and they're like telling you all about their new baby, and yeah, that'd be super weird. But now, do you see any humor in that, or I mean, are you just like, yeah, I'll kind of laugh along with you on that, but it still sucks.
I think it's more the latter, but then also it's funny because I actually probably last year had an acquaintance bring up, oh my gosh, after you gave birth, you texted me that, and it was so funny. And obviously, he wasn't
Yeah,
thinking about. I don't
yeah,
think people think that it don't. I don't think people realize that it was all intertwined, and it wasn't just like
mm-hmm,
I woke up one day and I was psychotic. Like it was kind of a gradual journey
mm-hmm,
there. But agonized over that because it wasn't a text with a baby, but I'd like texted him and been like, "Oh my god, this is so funny. You have to hear this story." And so it was kind of healing in a weird way to hear him say
hmm,
like, oh, that was so funny when you texted me that. I was like,
Mm.
okay, like maybe it was funny. Maybe it wasn't all super embarrassing and cringe. But
Yeah. Well, even the way you tell it in the story brings a little you bring there's just a little there's a little bit of attitude behind it where that just kind of makes it.
yeah.
And I think it's really cool to hear you talk about it being like a ramp up to getting worse, because that makes sense that like it could be experienced that way by people around you without knowing that you were actually heading down a really scary, slippery slope instead of like going up, because it could come across as charming or just a really excited mom here.
Yeah. I think that my loved ones did not get worried until I started having mood swings, and I was
Hmm.
going from being like the excited, funny, whatever, outgoing
Hmm.
mom to
Hmm.
like, I can't get out of bed right now because I'm crying because I'm so
Hmm.
overcome with emotion. So I think, and these were it was like minutes apart. It wasn't like days where I couldn't get out of bed and then days where I was happy. It was literally like within one day I'd have, up and down, up and down, up
Uh-huh.
and down. So I think that that's when they started to think like, like that's not normal behavior. But
Hmm.
again, you don't act normal after you have a kid. So like people,
Yeah.
people,
Right.
yeah, people weren't worried. I think they were just like, oh, this is interesting that this is happening. I think that it maybe like struck a chord. They were making note of it, but they weren't like, okay, let's call her doctor.
Hmm. And then hallucinations begin. Describe your memory of those hallucinations. What was that like?
I think that it would just, I mean, it just felt like a really, really bad dream, but I knew that I was awake. I think it's the best way to describe it. So
Hmm.
that's why it was so terrifying to me, because it was almost like everything was distorted. Like I was in a fun house, but I knew that I was awake. Like I knew that what I was seeing was reality. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm going to wake
Hmm.
up and say, oh, that was a bad dream. So I think that deep down, I just had this like really awful feeling of like, this is happening to me and it doesn't make any sense. But I have no other way to explain it other than it being real.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it was scary.
And up to this point, you'd kind of been going through some faith deconstruction and figuring out like what you believed about God. Your husband had worked, I think, it was at a music pastor that he
Yes,
had done,
yes.
and you had, as you mentioned earlier, like interpersonal difficulties with the place that he had worked before that were kind of tied up in racism or tied up in those sort of dynamics. And so you're not sure where you're at with God, but your hallucination was God. Like God started talking to you.
Yes.
And from what I can tell from the book, this sounds very literal. Like it sounds like you experienced it as completely real, that you were hearing God talking to you.
Yeah, so some of it was scary, but I think the God part was so thrilling to me. I was
Hmm.
just excited. I think that I hadn't realized how much I'd wanted that, and even in my then current faith where I wasn't Pentecostal, I wasn't seeking these, supernatural miracles.
Yeah, or
I
speaking in
think
tongues or
yes,
stuff
yes,
like
yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't doing any of that, but I think that I still there was a part of me that still felt just overcome with emotion that God was finally talking to me. And I now
Hmm.
know that if you have religious history, you're more likely to experience my flavor
Hmm.
of delusion. So it all kind of makes sense that
Hmm.
that's how that played out for me. But yeah, it was very exciting.
Like how real would you describe it? Did it literally sound like an actual real voice? Like you experienced it as a something you heard?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a conversation with someone who's right in front of you.
Just like this, just like
Yeah,
we're talking right
yeah.
now. So it seemed that real. And then you're going to end up being hospitalized again. How did that happen?
My family did not want to take me to the hospital because, again, we're in the pandemic at a point where there are no visitors are allowed. If I go into the hospital, I'm going to have to walk in alone. I'm not going to see my baby for as long as I'm hospitalized. So
Yeah.
they are very aware of this, how high the stakes are, for lack of a better term. But I once I started to hear from God, I think that, I asked my husband much later, like, when did you know that I was going to be hospitalized eventually? And he was like, yeah, once the God stuff started, like he knew that it wasn't mood swings and it wasn't just like a random mental health episode that'll go away if she got enough sleep and drink enough water. I think he knew like something seriously wrong. So the conversations about the hospital were happening already, but nothing had been decided, and I had a moment where I just felt so full of panic that I was like, I need to go to the hospital right now.
Hmm.
And the hallucinations didn't get bad until I was in the ER. So I feel like that was when it like became scariest. And if I'd experienced that at home, it would have been even more traumatic. So that is always so interesting to me that I had
Hmm.
this gut feeling that I needed to go in. Um And I begged them to take me. I said, I need to go right now, which doesn't make sense, for the state that I was in to then be begging to go to the hospital. As I'm thrilled that God's talking to me, like deep down, I
Yeah.
knew something was wrong. I needed to be seen. So, yeah.
What kind of things was God saying to you?
Gosh, even when I look back in the notebooks, it's so funny because it's just like so much at once.
And you mentioned the notebooks because you started writing a bunch of these
Yes,
revelations down, like,
yes,
and you actually took some of these home from the hospital. These like a
yes,
stack of these books of
yes.
revelations.
Yeah. So I started writing. I literally grabbed like a scrap of paper and a pen on my nightstand the night that God started speaking to me and started writing things down. And
Hmm.
the overwhelming delusion that I had, the thing that I was hearing was that I was a prophet and that God was the one who was talking to me, that I was going to rewrite the Bible. There were
Yeah.
other threads there that kind of popped up, but those were the things that I fixated on.
Yeah, there was going to be this new Bible, and you were going to be the prophet for it.
Yes.
Now, meanwhile, your new baby and your husband are on the outside. You're hospitalized, and you did get time. There were like hours when you could call home and talk to him.
Yes.
And I thought it would be helpful to have you read from. I think this is on page 74, where you have one of these conversations. You call home and talk to your husband, and then the book's really cool because you kind of go back and forth between your thinking when you were experiencing psychosis, and that's in italicized text throughout the book. We kind of get to experience it alongside you, like your thought process and what you were thinking. So this excerpt you're going to read from a phone conversation you had, and then you're going to go into kind of that internal dialogue you were having under psychosis.
Sure. Me. God told me I'm in big trouble. Him. I love you and miss you. Me. People are trying to kill me here. Him. Her umbilical cord stump fell off. Me. You don't believe me. Him. I love you and miss you. God has chosen me and they're trying to kill me because I know the truth. I'm thrilled and terrified. My husband wants to talk about meaningless things. I'm not sure the baby he keeps mentioning is mine anyway. God sends me dreams to might only exist in my mind. I have more important things to consider, even if she exists, if she's even real. Possibles performing experiments on me without my consent, I'd never say yes to this. I have a gnarly wound on my stomach, proof of the abuse. I ask God to help me forget the pain, but it throbs incessantly. If that isn't enough, I can't escape the other patients, or are they demons? I'm desperate to get out. My husband can only say he loves me. Useless. My partner, my protector, except now I'm entirely alone. He doesn't sound the same anyway. His voice strained instead of strong. Has he been replaced by an actor pretending to be my husband? I have to ask Jesus. I later realized he was desperately trying not to cry.
Yeah. So you were thinking about other patients trying to kill you.
Yeah.
You were thinking about, kind of everybody trying to kill you. You talk about being thrilled and terrified because God had this mission for you that you were
Yeah,
trying to fulfill. And you also saw visual hallucinations as well,
I
right?
did, yes.
Okay, the one that really kind of stuck with me is seeing corpses in the showers at the hospital. Whoa. And I'm asking the same thing again. Like you're telling me it was like as literal as looking at me right here on this screen, right? Like you saw this.
Yeah, and I think that that was maybe the scariest part of it for me in
Hmm.
retrospect, is knowing
Hmm.
that this could happen to anyone and
Mm-hmm.
you have no idea. I always explain it as, if I went outside and said the sky is green and it's literally green and everyone around me is like, it's blue. Are you okay? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
not true. That's how it felt. Like, I'm like
Mm-hmm.
in this weird situation where like things don't feel right and no one believes me. But yeah, I mean, I'd have very detailed, very gruesome hallucinations,
Mm.
and it was very difficult.
There's a chapter called The Pretty Prophet. You'd spent a lot of time in your life worried about your appearance, worried about your size. A lot of women experience this, and increasingly men, not to mention trans and non-binary folks, feelings about body image. So this was a struggle for you. But you say the psychosis actually kind of took all that away for a time. And this is the chapter, The Pretty Prophet. Talk about that experience.
It was very interesting because I think that that was, in the moment, one of the bright sides of the psychosis.
Hmm.
I was so focused on what my mission from God and my daughter being real or not being real and all of that. I didn't have much room in my head for anything else. But I think deeper than that, I had God telling me that I was so special and that I was so beautiful and that I was the smartest person in the world. I was the only prophet of his. that the old Bible didn't mean anything anymore because he had me. So I mean, I had all of this, and I had such an inflated sense of self that's kind of embarrassing. But in that
Yeah.
moment, I did not have the capacity to think, oh my God, like, my thighs are so huge. You know what I mean? It's just like there's no room for that.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's that scripture, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? From Job.
Yep.
And like,
Yeah.
you were having that. Like, you were having some things given to you, some things taken away, but it wasn't always good. But getting out of the headspace of hating your body or having those kind of anxieties, you describe as almost being a relief, like almost a positive part of the experience. Also with anxiety and fear, you describe, like you say you're a really fearful child. You were scared of roller coasters and bugs and being home alone and like scary movies. You were scared of the rapture, which is this Christian belief that like believers will be taken up into heaven suddenly. And if you're not a believer, you're going to be left back behind on earth. So, but that all that fear around everything also kind of went away in and out during the psychosis as well. You felt kind of free of fear some of the time.
I did. And I do have to say that I'm so jealous of anyone who was wondering, what's the rapture? And then heard your
Yeah.
explanation and was like, okay, I
Yeah.
get it. Because I'm like, I wish that was me. I wish that I did not have this deep-seated religious trauma.
Yeah. People be worried that they'd like wake up and their parents would be gone or
Yeah.
something. Or that, yeah.
And because of the Left Behind movies, you thought that their clothes would be there and they wouldn't be there. It was like
Yeah.
it was very weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I no longer felt the anxiety that I'd once knew. I mean, I was anxious that people were going to kill me or that I was going to be sent to hell, but I wasn't
Yeah.
anxious about, a burglar breaking in or
Yeah.
Jesus coming back. So I guess
Yeah.
it's a trade-off.
You say like the panic attacks would kind of go away a little bit too. You say that like it felt like, here's a quote. You say, for 21 blissful days, my lifelong struggle with anxiety is over. I don't care what anybody thinks. And then one of the things you wrote you have these journals that you wrote. One of them in all caps that you wrote, stop trusting random people.
Yes. Because I think that I was worried. I mean, to an extent, there may have been some truth in that because I was, as I mentioned in the book, giving prophecies left and right and trying to fight other patients. So I think that I could have kept myself a little bit, but yeah, I think that I just felt so free. I felt, yeah, I understand, and I say this in the book. I think maybe not, but I understand that people sometimes don't go back on their medication, on their psychiatric medication, or choose to stay off because it is like very liberating. It is very freeing.
You just mentioned like kind of getting into it with other patients. Did you have any violent impulses or anything? Because I think some of the most famous instances of postpartum psychosis are when a mother kills a child or multiple children, and there have been some really publicized cases about this. Did you have any violent tendencies?
I think overall, my delusion centered around someone trying to hurt my daughter. I didn't know if she was real, but she was still important to me. So I had all these ideas that she was out in the world and someone was trying to hurt her. So I think that as far as violent tendencies go, I never had any delusions toward my daughter, like any violent delusions toward my daughter, which is pure luck. But I do think that I was irate. I was convinced that if anyone tried to hurt her, that I was going to have to kill them. So I think that that was how it kind of manifested for me. But as I mentioned, like me not wanting to hurt my daughter is just pure like luck of the draw because with psychosis, you don't have a say in what you're thinking.
We've talked a little bit about your religious background. I want to talk a little bit more about your relationship to God, because your symptoms, like we said, were hearing God literally talking to you as a real voice, and you had already kind of let go of the idea of a God who would intervene like that already. Your deconstruction, this is going to be an oversimplification, but to give people a sense of it, you kind of had trouble with what theologians call theodicy, the problem of evil or the problem of suffering. And it's like, why do bad things happen to good people? What is God's role in that? Because what's worse, God is not answering somebody's prayer, like some child is dying of cancer and God doesn't answer that prayer, or that there's no God to answer that prayer. Both of those outcomes seem really bad.
Right.
And so you were kind of maybe coming to a view of God that was just more disconnected than that, not so intervening in life. But then your psychosis literally brings the voice of God to you.
Yes, it does. I think that I'd kind of reconciled it because I still called myself a Christian with things just happen. Like I didn't view God as like, I'd once said as like this puppet master who's in control of everything. I kind of had a thought that there was a higher being, that there was something out there, and that, basically, like, and this is like, heretical, but I think that I can, and to make peace with my Christianity, I thought, okay, maybe God isn't like all powerful and all controlling. Like, he's just there and he loves us, but he's not, pulling the puppet strings for whether or not someone dies of
Hmm.
cancer or whether this war breaks out. He's just kind of like more so walking with us. So that was kind of where I landed. And then again, I started to hear the voice of God, and all of that went out the window.
Yeah, like suddenly you had this fervent, not even a fervent belief, it was a fervent knowledge. Like you
Yeah.
experienced life as someone who knew God existed and knew God spoke directly to you. And you even talk about it with a little bit of, I don't know, like you almost missed it a little bit. Like when it was over, there was something about having such a sure knowledge of God that you lost, obviously, after the psychosis was ended. You almost kind of look back a little wistfully about it, a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that it was, especially in the immediate aftermath, was so hard for me
Hmm.
to make peace with the God that I'd come to terms with before psychosis. Okay, he's not all powerful, he's not all this, he's not all that, he's just there. Because I was like, but he is all those things, and he is my friend, and we talk all the time. So I think that it was a lot for me to process. I didn't expect to miss it at all, so I think I felt a little bit guilty because
Mm-hmm.
I'd been away from my daughter, and I felt like that should be my focus, not missing
Mm-hmm.
psychosis. But I mean, that's where I ended up.
And is that kind of where you're at today? Do you still consider yourself a Christian? Like where did your religion end up in the with the postpartum psychosis in the rear view?
I think that I'm like relaxed, loosely Christian. I mean, I still go to
Hmm.
church. We go to progressive church. We love the people there, my husband and I. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to God and prayer and the Bible, it's like a touchy subject for me.
Hmm.
So I I'm clumsy of a Christian who does not pray or read the Bible. But
Mm-hmm.
that's unfortunately where I've had to land on that.
Do you have to worry about like people online giving you crap about faith stuff from either direction? Like, do you have to be careful about how you talk? Like you mentioned, like this is going to sound heretical. Like, do you have to worry about sounding heretical?
I feel like I have shied away from those conversations on social media just because it is overwhelming to me to get
Hmm.
feedback from people about deeply personal things sometimes. So I'm very open on social media. But when it comes to faith, I just don't talk about it
Hmm.
because, again, I feel like it's so hard to be nuanced, and like people are just ready to jump down your throat. So, in my experience, so
Yeah.
I just don't touch it.
Yeah. Well, to remind people, we're talking about your memoir, Missing Me, a memoir of postpartum psychosis and the long road back. It's Ayana Lage. She's also a freelance writer. You might have seen some of her work in the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, and other places. She earned her bachelor's in journalism from the University of Florida. She lives in Tampa with her husband and two kids. I mentioned infanticide a minute ago, and you helpfully take some time in the book to talk about that because postpartum psychosis is heavily associated with infanticide, and you say it's hard to not to angrily wonder what kind of parent could do that to your child. But you say, once you hear the voices yourself, there's a perspective shift. These women are not villains. Often they believe they're protecting their children, like any good parent would, and I easily could have been one of them. So it seems to have kind of changed your perspective on how you think about those cases of infanticide or, what other women are going through.
It definitely did. I think that if anyone took the time to really dive in and read more about postpartum psychosis, they would have no choice but to also acknowledge, obviously, that it is a horrible tragedy when a child is hurt or dies, like
Hmm.
full stop, obviously. But also that, these mothers are not monsters who have plotted this. I mean, one example that I read while researching was a woman who had a delusion that her house was on fire, that there were
Mm.
firefighters on the first floor. She was on the second. She was getting ready to throw her baby out the window to the firefighters to save them. And her husband found, like, basically caught her in the process of all of this and took her to the hospital. She recovered.
Mm.
The baby was fine. Nothing happened. But even that, hearing that, I was like, that, as someone who experienced postpartum psychosis, it still shifted my perspective because I was like, this really is a disorder that can twist everything. This
Hmm.
mom would have been on the news as a monster if this had happened. In her mind, she's saving her baby from a house fire. So it's just like,
Hmm.
yeah, there's definitely layers to it. And I think that it's much easier to just shake your head and say, oh, this terrible person, but it's not that easy.
And because you've experienced it, you talk about having more compassion and being able to empathize a little bit. I wonder if your own confidence was shaken at all. Like once you've experienced such a radical break from reality that you can now like recognize for what it was, but you also remember how real it was at the time. Did it like make you lose any self-confidence in your own brain? Like how do we do you think about that? Like, is any of this real? Like, can I trust my brain to not be misfiring at any given time? Like, do you struggle with that?
Yeah, I mean, not so much now, but I do have my moments, but especially
Hmm.
after, it'd be as simple as me saying like, "Oh, what was that sound?" And it's
Hmm.
described one of the incidents in the book, but something like, "What was that sound?" And then my husband and daughter not hearing anything, and me being like, "Okay, it's happening again. I'm losing my mind."
Yeah.
Um, so as I mentioned, I describe it in the book, but there's so many different examples of it that I could have probably spent like 3 chapters just on
Mm.
that. But I think that with therapy, it has gotten a little bit easier, but I'm never going to trust my mind as much as you trust yours.
Hmm.
Like, it's just, I don't think that'll ever happen for me again.
Wow. Does that change day-to-day life much? Like, do you recognize it each day, or does it not really come up very often?
I think that I'm used to it. I think that
Hmm.
my anxiety was so bad after the psychosis that
Hmm.
I now have a manageable level of anxiety. So I can live with it. I'm
Yeah.
fine with it. But I definitely will have triggering moments where I am reminded of what happened.
Right. And some of your memories are painful. You talk about some of the regrets that you have about maybe some of the terrible things that you did or terrible things that you said. And you didn't include all of them in the book. And you've even wondered sometimes, like, if you should apologize for some of the things you did during that time.
Yeah.
Where have you landed on that about, like, do I owe somebody an apology for saying something to them while I was experiencing psychosis?
I did apologize to my husband and he was like, "Are you kidding?" Like, that's the least of my
Yeah.
worries. But I think that I was so overcome by embarrassment that the idea of re-embarrassing
Hmm.
myself by bringing it up again and not just burying it under the rug
Hmm.
was really difficult for me. But also I think that I had to believe or told myself, they know what was happening. This isn't a case of me like suddenly becoming like, a terribly mean person. And you're like, what's happening there? I was hospitalized right after and I was there for 17 days. Like something was clearly wrong with me. Um, so to answer your question, I think that there were a lot of reasons why I haven't or didn't apologize to everyone who I probably hurt. I don't know if that was the right decision, but I mean, that's where I landed.
Hmm. Any specific apologies that you like were glad to give?
So for my husband, I think, and I talk about this in the book and it still makes me cringe, but I, went on social media and wrote a long rambling screed and signed his name on it. Um, Basically making him look as erratic as I was in the moment. So,
Yeah.
I felt so bad about that. And I finally like worked up the courage to apologize. And he was like, "I don't give a shit what people on the internet think about me." Like, what are you talking about? So like that was like very freeing because I'm like, okay, like I'm overthinking a lot of this.
Yeah. You also kind of worried about the effect it would have on your child. Like people talk about how important the first period of life is for attachment and all those things. And
Yes.
how are you feeling about that now?
She's going to be 6 next month, and I think that I've finally reached a point where I am like, "Okay, it sucks that I miss it, but it didn't change anything long
Hmm.
term." She's incredibly attached to me. Sometimes, like, as parents can attest, too attached. I'm like, "Okay, can I just, like, go to the bathroom, please?"
Yeah,
So
they know when you go in there too.
yes, yes, they do.
They could be anywhere in the house and be like, "Okay, they're in the bathroom. Let's go."
Yeah, let's ask for a snack. Um, but yeah, I think that now just with time, I'm like, okay, we have such a good, solid relationship that I can't imagine it being any different. Like I feel like what we have
Yeah.
is so special. Yeah.
God, I would just encourage you to hold on to that because in the ups and downs of parent-child relationships, obviously I can't predict like what's going to happen with but I know that like teenage years, there are no guarantees about how
Yeah.
that's so all of that. And I hope that you really remember how you feel about that right now. I would also recommend there's a fellow traveler episode I'm going to recommend with this one. So another episode. I don't know if you've heard of Nancy Reddy's book. Nancy Reddy, it's called The Good Mother Myth. And I would recommend checking it out because she has some really, really fascinating reporting on like attachment theory and how the data's not really great on that. And so it really, to me, helped a lot in terms of, okay, we put so much pressure on ourselves as parents, and whether we messed up or whether, and we're going to mess our kids up in certain ways. That's just how life is. But I recommend checking out Nancy's book, or at least her episode, to kind of like give you better context for that attachment stuff. It's a lot more, it takes the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah.
So
That sounds great. I'm going to look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Okay. We talked a little bit about the records that you kept while you were in the hospital, the notebooks that you wrote in. You also checked out the records from the hospital stay that the hospital kept, and you were discouraged from doing that, actually. Why discouraged, and why did you decide to look at the records?
I'm not great at following directions and sometimes engage in self-sabotage. So that's the answer to the second question. But for the first, my psychologist felt pretty strongly that medical records are not, especially sensitive medical records, are not written with the patient in mind as far as like they're going to read this one day. It's very clinical. It's very like black and white. There's not really, they're not softening anything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So she was aware that was going to be the situation that I was in if I read them. And I kind of was like, oh, whatever, it'll be fine. And it was not fine.
Oh, no.
But eventually I included excerpts in the book, so I was able to return to them. But those first few times reading it were really difficult.
Just made you feel shame, or?
I think I just felt really sad, honestly. I think that I had some corroboration for some of the things that I remember, and I was like, oh, this did happen, this happened to me, and like, there's nothing I can do about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, your book doesn't end on that note. You also talk about like life moving forward, and you actually decided to have another child, which was a risk. You say that, I think the statistics show that about 50% of women who experience postpartum psychosis can experience it again. And I imagine that people are really going to judge you for taking the risk. And how did you process it to a point where you take the risk to say, okay, I know there's a high risk of postpartum psychosis again, but I want to have another child. I'm going to go for it.
It took me about 1.5 years to reach a point where I was thinking about this regularly, 1.5 years to reach a point where I was like, okay, like I definitely want to do this. I think that I was less so worried about like people's perception and more so just thinking about what if this messes up my relationship with my existing child, if I am in a psychotic or depressive state or something, happens after birth and I'm not really available to her. How will that affect her in the long run? Because she's now old enough that she is, incredibly, incredibly aware and attached to me and wants to be with me every second of the day. So I was very much like, is it selfish? I'm so glad. I mean, my son's going to be 2 next month, and I'm so glad, obviously, that I went with that. But it was a hard decision.
What if you're like, this was a disaster? Like, I don't even like my second kid. Yeah.
No, I'm really glad that we did it, but it wasn't an easy choice.
Was your spouse worried about it? Like, I think that's, when I was thinking through it, I'm thinking like, okay, I would worry about the infanticide possibility. I would worry about like whether you would get more scarred, whether my partner would get more scarred by another hospitalization experience. Like,
for sure.
What was his calculation?
He was definitely worried. I think that he kind of had the approach of it would be happening to me if it did happen. So if I was willing to brave the risk, then he was going to brave it too. But I mean, I talk about this sometimes, I'd much rather be in my shoes than his when I like think about the idea of me calling him and him, speaking gibberish and not knowing whether or not he's ever going to come back to himself. And I'm at home with a new baby and nothing makes sense. I'd rather be in the hospital. So, I mean, I think that he definitely like dealt with a lot during and after.
Did the experience kind of change your views? I'm going back to that first hospitalization where you saw the questions that you thought were, wow, whoa, I'm not that. Has that kind of changed your perspective now that you've experienced both sides of that?
Yeah, I think I'm a lot more sensitive, which I mean can be a good or bad thing. But, I think like, obviously it's common for people to describe something as psychotic. Oh my God, he's acting so psychotic right now.
Yeah.
And
psycho.
Even now I'm like that, like I feel like a little, tinge of something when I hear that, because it is such a sensitive topic. But I definitely think that I have a lot more compassion now.
I feel that sometimes when people say crazy, I've kind of stopped using that as a word. Like, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's connected up into these bigger, these really bigger real experiences that people have. And that kind of language has been used to demean and even harm people that are experiencing mental health issues. So I'm not trying to like come down on anybody. It's a very common word.
Right.
But I think if people can find substitutions for it, it certainly hasn't hurt my life to use other language.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I talked a little bit about like trusting your cognition again after experiencing such a disconnect from it. And there's a quote here I'll read where you say, "I'll never move on from psychosis. I don't want to. It's taught me too much. But there is room in the aftermath for joy." What does the joy look like in the aftermath?
I think that I just find myself feeling, and again, like when I say the psychosis has taught me a lot, even what we talked about mental health stigma and me being more sensitive and compassionate to like the conversations I'm having and things like that. I think that I just find a lot of beauty now in daily life. I think that I'm sure that anyone who's had a traumatic experience can probably relate to on some level. I am much more appreciative, and I think that I am just less likely to take things for granted, which is a really nice thing. So I'm grateful for that.
Mm. That's Ayana Lage. We're talking about her book, Missing Me, a memoir of postpartum psychosis and the long road back. And Ayana, I always like to close with regrets, challenges, and surprises. This is a moment for you to reflect on the book itself and like kind of your relationship to the book. So is there anything now that the book is out that you have regrets about? Maybe something maybe I shouldn't have put that in there. Oh, I wish I put that in there. So that's one. Or what was the most challenging part of writing this book? Or what surprised you in the course of doing this? Maybe you learned something more about yourself, or you did some research on a particular thing and learned something new. So you can kind of choose your own adventure here about regrets, challenges, and surprises.
I love that. I think I'm going to go with surprise. I think that I was really nervous when I even working on the book proposal because I was opening these notebooks again and I wasn't sure where it would take me. But I think that I have been surprised by my own resilience, that I'm able to have these conversations and I'm able to talk about it and to not break down, and to process it and to be something terrible that happened to me, but not something that I am kind of chained to or bound to forever. Like I've taken what I need to from the psychosis and like am now living with that. And so writing that, I think that I was honestly surprised at how easy some parts of it were, because I thought that it was going to be like this hugely traumatic, terrible experience where I was like slaving to meet a book deadline and weeping because of all the trauma that I'd lived through. But it really wasn't. I think that I was able to really connect with myself in new ways, thanks to the process. So I'm glad I wrote the book.
Yeah, I think there's something about like self-narration that can be healing, not always.
Yes.
But like just finding a coherent story behind something that seems so incoherent could be encouraging. Like, yeah, that's cool. I like that a lot. Well, I wish more people would talk about postpartum psychosis. It's not the most rare thing in the world, and I'm glad that this book exists. I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and for being willing to put yourself out there. That doesn't seem like a small thing to me. To me, it seems like a pretty big deal to be willing to do that.
Well, thank you, Blair. This was a wonderful conversation, so I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you. That's it for this episode of Relationscapes, but we're going to hear more about this topic over the next little while. We'll hear from guests like Teresa Wong, artist and author of the acclaimed graphic novel Dear Scarlet, the story of my postpartum depression, as well as Dr. Chris Choukalis, author of Even the Darkest Night, a father's journey of hope and healing from paternal depression. We'll also hear from influencer activist Rosie Card, who will join us to share her own experience of postpartum psychosis. The fellow traveler episode I recommended during this episode is Nancy Reddy's interview. It's called The Bad Dads Who Helped Invent Modern Motherhood. If you're enjoying Relationscapes, please take a second to rate and review it in Apple Podcasts or rate it in Spotify. Another way you can help me grow the show is by recommending it to a friend. So if somebody in your life came to mind while you were listening to this one, send them a link. You can follow me on Instagram or TikTok, where I post videos from each episode and other bonus stuff. It's @_Relationscapes. Mates of State provides our theme music. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, an independent journalist in Salt Lake City, and I hope to spend more time with you soon here on Relationscapes.